Wyoming Territory, August 1879. The train screeched into the dusty depot at Green River Station, steam curling in the dry heat, and Hattie Norwood stepped off with a carpetbag in one hand and fear tightening in her chest. She had never left Kansas before. She had never traveled alone. And she had never shared a bed with a man. The thought of it made her stomach twist, but she was not here for foolishness. She was here for work, survival, a new life, if such a thing really existed for a woman like her. The telegram had come from a rancher needing help with his 2 children. She did not know much more than that, just a name, a place, and the promise of pay. She had no family left, no husband, no one who cared whether she lived or died. So she answered. She lifted her chin and walked toward the hitching post where a tall man leaned beside a bay gelding. His shirt was rolled at the sleeves, and sun had darkened his skin to a warm gold. His hat shadowed his face, but he stood with the kind of stillness that made her pause. "You Hattie Norwood?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes. I'm Silas O'Doyle." He tipped his hat. "You took my wire." She looked up at him, and he was handsomer than she had expected. Sharp jaw, dark hair curling above his collar, eyes like river stone. He looked tired, though, not just in the body, but in a way that settled behind his shoulders. "I did. You said you had children who needed looking after." He nodded. "2. Their ma passed 2 winters ago. Been trying to manage the ranch and raise them, but I'm not doing either very well." She did not ask what had happened to their mother. Some things lived in a man's eyes heavy and quiet, and she had seen enough death in her own life to recognize it. He helped her into the saddle and tied her carpetbag behind them. "You ever ride before?" he asked. "Not really." He offered a low chuckle. "Well, best hang on." They rode out of town into open land, the sky endless above them. The sun lowered behind the buttes, and the ranch came into view. Nothing fancy, just a wide split log house, a small barn, and pastures stretching out like a painting. 2 children ran out barefoot when they arrived. A girl about 9, with a braid swinging down her back, and a boy maybe 6, with straw-colored hair and a gap in his smile. "Vera, Vaughn," Silas called. "Come meet Miss Norwood." The girl stood straighter. "Are you going to be our new mama?" Hattie's heart jumped. "No, sweetheart. I'm just here to help your father." Vaughn frowned. "Mama used to braid Vera's hair every morning." "I can do that," Hattie said gently. The girl's eyes softened. "Okay." The house was simple and clean, though worn. A pot still sat on the stove. Dried herbs hung from the rafters. Silas showed her to the small room at the back, where a narrow bed waited and a wash basin stood near the window. "You'll be comfortable here," he said. "Let me know if you need anything." She paused, studying him. "You seem like a good father." He leaned against the doorframe. "I try to be, but this world's hard, and I reckon I'm better with horses than with hair ribbons." She smiled, the first true smile since her train pulled in. "Then it is a good thing I came." He nodded once, then stepped away. That night, she braided Vera's hair by lamplight, read Vaughn a story from her Bible, and sat alone in the quiet room with her hands in her lap. She had never shared a bed. Her marriage had been short and brutal. She had run. Now she was here. The next weeks passed in steady rhythm. Mornings started with chores: feeding chickens, collecting eggs, sweeping the porch. Vera and Vaughn followed her like shadows. They asked questions, laughed freely, and slowly, Hattie felt her chest loosen. She sang while she cooked. She stitched Vaughn's torn shirt. She taught Vera how to read the word hope. Silas watched her with quiet eyes. He was not a loud man, but he noticed everything: how she preferred tea over coffee, how she kept her shoes clean, how she tucked her hair behind one ear when she concentrated. One night, a storm rolled over the plains and thunder cracked the sky. Vaughn screamed. Hattie leapt from bed and found him in the hallway, trembling. "I want Mama," he cried. She knelt, pulling him to her chest. "I know, baby. I know." Silas came from the other room, his face tight with worry. "You all right?" Hattie looked up at him, holding Vaughn close. "He is now." That night, she curled up beside the boy in the big bed just until he fell asleep. Silas stood by the doorway, watching. Then he turned and walked away. Days later, they rode into town together for supplies. On the way back, the wagon wheel broke. Silas cursed under his breath and jumped down, examining the damage. "Can it be fixed?" Hattie asked. "Not today. We will have to walk the rest of the way." It was 6 miles home. The sun dipped low, and they walked without speaking for a while. Then Hattie said, I never expected this. What? This life? These children? You? He looked at her. You regret it? She shook her head. No, just surprised. They stopped beneath a cottonwood tree. The wind caught her hair, and he reached to tuck it behind her ear. His fingers brushed her cheek without meaning to, and both of them froze. She looked up at him, her voice barely above a whisper. I have never shared a bed. His eyes burned into hers. Then share mine forever. She blinked. He swallowed. I am not asking for tonight. Not even tomorrow. Just. If you ever decide you want something more than helping with chores and braiding hair, I want you to know that it is yours. She felt everything stop inside her, then thrummed to life again. I have known hurt, she said. I will not be part of that. She nodded slowly. I believe you. They walked home in silence, but something had changed. The air between them hummed. That night, she sat by the window, watching the stars, and when Silas passed by her door, he paused. She stood. He did not speak. She walked to him and put her hand in his. He lifted it to his chest, right above his heart, and held it there. Then he whispered, You do not have to be alone anymore. And for the first time in years, she believed it. By late September, the wind carried a sharper edge. The mornings started with hard frost silvering the grass, and the sun took longer to rise over the hills. Hattie stood on the porch before dawn, shawl pulled tight, watching her breath drift into the pale air. Inside, Vera stirred in the girl's room, and Vaughn's quiet voice followed, muffled by quilts. Behind her, the door opened. You'll catch cold out here, Silas said. I wanted to see the sky before the smoke from the stove changed its color. He stepped beside her, one hand still working the cufflink at his wrist. You always talk like that. Soft and strange. I never know what you'll say next. She glanced at him. Do you want me to stop? No, he said, eyes on the horizon. I want to hear the next thing. They stood without speaking as the sun broke over the ridge, spilling light across the fence line. The horses pawed the frozen ground in the pasture beyond, and the rooster crowed late, as if resenting the cold. Vera wants to help with the cooking now, Hattie said, after a moment. She asked me if I'd teach her how to make cornbread without burning the edges. She always watched her ma in the kitchen, he said. Used to sit on the counter with her feet in the flour bin. I won't make her stop remembering. I didn't think you would. She turned to go back inside, but Silas caught her hand. I've been thinking about what I said, he murmured. She didn't move. So have I. I meant it. But it doesn't have to be now or soon. I just want you to stay when the snow comes. Her fingers curled around his. I don't know how to be wanted without being used. He looked down at their hands. Then let me show you slow. That morning, she let Vera measure the cornmeal and pour the buttermilk. She didn't correct the girl's crooked stirring or the little mess she made. Vaughn sat at the table carving a bit of pine with Silas's whittling knife, tongue tucked in concentration. After breakfast, Silas hitched the wagon to fetch fencing wire from a neighbor 20 miles east. Hattie packed him bread, apples, and a folded note he didn't see her slip between the cloth napkin and the tin cup. He would not return until the day after next. That afternoon, she taught the children how to press wildflowers between pages of an old ledger. Vaughn picked a yellow daisy still clinging to life, and Vera chose a sprig of sage. Hattie wrote their names beneath each plant in careful script. Later, as the sun dipped low, she pulled the old rocking chair onto the porch and began sewing patches over the knees of Vaughn's work pants. Vera came out with her own shawl and leaned against the rail. Do you like my papa? The girl asked. Hattie looked up. Yes, I do. I think he likes you too. He talks quieter when you're around. Nicer. Hattie smiled, but kept her eyes on the fabric. He's a good man, Vera. You could stay forever if you wanted. I just might. The child nodded as if that settled something. By the time Silas returned, the first snow had dusted the high ridges. His coat was rimmed with frost where it had soaked through and refroze. He stomped the slush from his boots and set the fencing wire down by the barn. Hattie, he called. She stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron. You're late. Got caught behind a herd moving east. Lost near an hour. You find the note? He blinked. What note? She pulled her shawl tight and walked to him. In the bundle. I wrote that I hoped you'd come back before the snow stuck. He studied her face. I'd have come back even if it buried the hills. That night, after the children had gone to bed, She waited by the hearth. Silas sat across from her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "You said once you'd show me slow," she said. "I'd like to start learning." He didn't move for a long moment. Then he stood, crossed the room, and offered his hand. She rose, placing her fingers in his again. They walked to the back room together, where everything had once been hers alone. He didn't take off his boots until she had sat on the bed and pulled hers off first. He watched her movements like someone memorizing a map. When their shoulders touched, he asked, "You sure?" She nodded, not because she was certain of everything, but because she trusted the ground beneath her feet for the first time in years. They lay side by side, not touching beyond what the narrow mattress allowed. The firelight flickered across the walls, and outside, wind brushed the eaves. "I've never slept beside someone who let me rest," she whispered. "I don't want to be anything else but that." She closed her eyes. And for the first time since Kansas, she slept through the night without waking once. By mid-October, the mornings bit deeper through wool sleeves, and the woodpile shrank faster than Silas liked. He rose before first light to split more, the frost crackling beneath his boots, and Hattie sometimes watched him from the kitchen window while she stirred corn mush for the children. She didn't say it aloud, but she liked the rhythm of him moving through the yard, deliberate, unhurried, strong in a way that felt built for staying. She'd grown used to the sound of his boots on the porch steps, the way he always wiped his hands on his trousers before lifting a child or touching her shoulder. She hadn't yet returned to her own room. That morning, Vera sat at the table brushing her doll's hair with a piece of bone comb, while Vaughn counted dried beans into a tin cup. "I saw a fox out by the fence line," Vera said. "It had a white face and a crooked tail." "Did it see you?" Hattie asked. It stopped and stared like it was thinking. Vaughn looked up. "Maybe it was a spirit." "Spirits have wings," Vera told him, confident. "Not if they're foxes." Hattie leaned over and kissed Vaughn's head. "Spirits or not, no walking past the fence line without your father or me. Wild things get hungry this time of year." That afternoon, Silas rode out to help a neighbor move cattle before the first snow locked the lower trails. He wouldn't be back until dusk. Hattie used the time to teach the children how to cut fabric for a quilt she'd started piecing from scraps tucked in her trunk. "I want mine to have stars," Vera said, picking through the fabric. "You pick them, I'll help you stitch." Vaughn squinted down at his square. "Mine looks like a potato." "It's a very fine potato," Hattie said, and he grinned. After the children were asleep, she sat by the hearth with her mending and waited for the sound of hooves. The wind picked up outside, rattling the shutters. She thought of Silas out in it, coat pulled tight, riding through the dark. When he finally returned, his cheeks were raw with cold and his hat rimmed with snow. "You're late," she said, rising. "Had to ride wide around a downed tree." Mule nearly bucked into a ravine. She crossed the floor without thinking, loosening his scarf, brushing the ice from his collar. He caught her wrist gently, holding it against his chest. "Wasn't sure if you'd still be up. I don't sleep easy when you're out." He nodded once, then bent to kiss the inside of her wrist before letting it go. Later, as they lay in bed, she turned toward him. "Do you ever think about leaving this land?" He blinked slow. "What for?" "I don't know. I've just never stayed anywhere long enough to think about staying." He propped his head on one hand. "You want to leave?" "No. I just want to know what it feels like to belong somewhere on purpose." "You do," he said. "You belong here because you chose to." She traced a seam in the quilt. "And if winter's hard, we'll get through. And if spring brings fire, we'll get through that too. But what if it's me that breaks something?" He looked at her for a long time before saying, "Then I'll help you fix it." She didn't answer, but she moved closer, tucking herself beneath his arm. He held her like something precious but not fragile, and she knew, deep in her bones, that a man like him would never ask her to be less than she was. The next morning, she woke before the children. The fire had burned down low, and the room was cold, but Silas's hand was still wrapped around hers. She stayed there a while, listening to the wind scratch against the walls, wondering how a woman like her had ended up in a bed that felt like shelter. She rose quietly and lit the stove, setting a kettle to boil. She didn't hum or speak, just moved through the kitchen with steady hands. As she reached for the flour tin, she noticed something tucked beneath the edge of the ledger. A small folded paper. Not her handwriting. She opened it. It was a land deed, creased and worn. Her name had been added in careful ink beside his. She turned as he stepped into the room, hair damp from the pump, shirt half-buttoned. "You did this." He nodded once. "It's your home, too." She held the paper to her chest. "You didn't ask. I figured you'd earned it long before you said yes to me." She walked to him slow. "I'll stay through winter," she said. He smiled. "Stay through spring, too." She reached up and cupped his jaw. "Through everything," she whispered. And he nodded, quiet. Just once. That was enough. November came with a hush, and the first snow that stuck fell overnight, blanketing the valley in soft white. The children woke early and pressed their faces to the window, breath fogging the glass, while Hattie stoked the kitchen stove with the last of the dry aspen. Silas had gone before dawn to help a neighbor drive sheep down from the ridge before the drifts thickened. He'd left a note scratched into the margin of the almanac, the only paper handy. She found it beside the coffee pot and ran her fingers over the slanted handwriting, then tucked it behind the flour tin. Vera and Vaughn bundled into coats and scarves and tumbled into the yard, chasing one another through the powder. Hattie followed, boots crunching behind them. She hung the laundry in the lean-to, breath rising in slow clouds, then paused to watch the children build a crooked snow woman with a stick arm and a rock for a mouth. Later, while Vaughn napped, Vera sat at the table shaping beeswax into a small horse, tongue poking from the corner of her mouth. "Did you have a mama who taught you things when you were little?" she asked without looking up. "No," Hattie said. "Not for long." "What happened?" "She got sick the same year the river flooded. Everything changed after that." Vera looked up. "Did it make you sad all the time?" "No, not all the time. Just in the quiet places." The girl nodded slowly. "Sometimes I feel sad in the quiet, too." Hattie reached across the table and brushed a crumb from Vera's sleeve. "That's how we remember the ones we miss. It doesn't mean we're broken." That afternoon, the wind picked up, blowing drifts against the barn doors. Hattie secured the shutters and brought in the chickens early. When she lit the fire that evening, the wood crackled slow, and the wind sighed through the seams of the house. Vaughn curled against her side on the rug, clutching the cloth doll his mother had stitched before her passing. He didn't speak, just pressed his cheek to her thigh and closed his eyes. Silas returned after dark, his coat stiff with frozen sleet. Hattie met him at the threshold with a towel and dry socks. He didn't speak right away, just stood there, eyes on her face, as if something had settled in him during the long ride home. "You're late," she said. He took the towel from her hands. "I couldn't leave until they got the last you down off the ridge. Snow was past my stirrups by the time I crossed the creek." She reached for his scarf, unwinding it carefully. "You didn't eat?" "No." She brought him a bowl of stew left warming on the stove, and he ate at the table while she sat across from him, hands folded. "I heard from a man in Laramie," he said between bites. "He's selling a printing press and a stack of old school books. Said they belonged to a teacher who passed 2 years back. Thought maybe Vera might want them." "Books?" she asked. He nodded. "And a cabinet press. Small enough to fit in the barn loft." She tilted her head. "You want to teach her to print? I thought you might want to." She leaned back, surprise flickering behind her ribs. "You kept that to yourself." "I wanted to be sure before I said it out loud." She watched him finish his meal, then stood and held out her hand. He took it without a word, and they walked to the back room. That night, as they lay beneath the thick quilt, she turned toward him, her voice low. "I used to think I'd spend my whole life never being seen." "You're seen," he said. Clear as day. She pressed her forehead to his chest, listening to the slow beat beneath his skin. "You're giving me more than any man ever has. That's because I'm not giving it to you like a trade. You don't owe me for anything." She didn't reply, only slipped her hand over his, anchoring herself in the quiet. He kissed the top of her head, then whispered, "You ever think you might love me?" She didn't pull away. "I think I already do." He exhaled slowly, like something long held had finally been released. The next morning, she rose before dawn and wrote a list for the winter stores. She added cloth for the book bindings and lamp oil for the barn loft. When Silas came in from feeding the stock, she handed him the list without a word. He scanned it, then looked up. "You planning to stay through summer too?" She nodded once, soft but sure. "Then I'll double the sugar. Vera might start baking. She's already asked for pie tins." He folded the list and tucked it into his coat. "I'll ride out tomorrow." She reached for the kettle. "You'll ride home too." He smiled, eyes catching hers. Always. And this time, when the wind came howling down from the north, it found a house sealed tight with warmth, and a woman who no longer flinched at the sound of it. The snow deepened in December, heavy and wet, piling high along the eaves and softening the world into a hush. The land folded into itself beneath the white, and days passed in quiet rhythm, firewood stacked, stock fed, bread rising slow on the stove's back corner. Inside the house, Hattie moved with the ease of belonging. She no longer paused before speaking, no longer hesitated to reach for Silas's hand as he came through the door with snow in his beard and the smell of open pasture on his coat. She had learned the slope of his shoulder in sleep, the way he lifted Vaughn without strain, how he always poured her coffee before his own. That week, Silas cleared the barn loft, swept it clean, and set the crate with the printing press inside beside a small table he'd built from leftover planks. Hattie ran her fingers across the metalwork, her touch reverent. "I was 13 the first time I saw one," she said. "My uncle printed town notices and wedding announcements. I used to sneak into his shop and press the letters into my palm." Silas leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "You never thought to take it up proper?" "There was never time. And no one asked if I wanted to." He watched her a moment longer. "I'm asking now." She looked back at him, something steadier than surprise in her eyes. "Then I'll learn." Each afternoon after lessons, Vera climbed the ladder to the loft and helped set type. Her fingers grew black with ink, and she laughed when her first try came out backward. Hattie showed her how to space the lines, how to press the platen evenly. Vaughn, too small to reach the table, sat on a hay bale and read aloud from the primer while they worked. One evening, as the light faded early and the wind rattled the barn doors, Silas climbed into the loft and handed Hattie a folded sheet. "What's this?" she asked. "Something I wrote down last night. Thought you might print it." She unfolded the paper and read silently. A short verse, plain-spoken but warm, about the sound of boots on pine floors and how love could live in the quiet. She looked up. "You wrote this?" He nodded. "Didn't say I was proud of it." "I am." She printed it clean, the ink still tacky when she handed it back. He tucked it into his pocket without a word and kissed her temple before heading down the ladder. That night, after the children were asleep, she pulled a small canvas bag from beneath the bed. Inside was a length of blue cotton with tiny ivory flowers, kept untouched since the spring before her marriage. "I was saving this for a time when I felt certain," she said, holding it up. Silas sat on the edge of the bed, watching her. "And you feel that now?" "I do. You want to wear it for something?" His voice was careful, not teasing. "I want to wear it when we say vows." He didn't blink. "You asking me?" "I'm telling you I'm ready." He stood and crossed the room, taking her hands in his. "Then we'll speak them in the spring, when the creek runs again. I don't need a preacher. Nor do I. Just you, and the children, and the land that gave us back our lives." She folded into his chest, her voice muffled against him. "You give me more than anyone ever has." He rested his chin on her hair. "You gave me back something I thought was gone." By March, the snows began to melt down the hillsides. Sap ran in the cottonwoods, and the chickens laid more regular. Vaughn lost a second tooth and buried it beside the porch to keep it close. Vera asked to print a story she'd written herself about a fox who built a house of pine cones and taught birds to sing. On the first warm day, Silas stood in the pasture with Hattie, the sun falling gold across the still wet ground. The children gathered wild violets and tucked them into her braid. She wore the blue cotton dress, and he wore the same coat he'd had since before she arrived, its sleeves patched by her own hand. They stood in a circle, just the four of them, and spoke promises out loud, no flourishes, no recitations, only the truth in their voices. Silas said, "I will keep you safe and never ask you to be smaller." Hattie said, "I will walk beside you as long as the road allows." Vera took both their hands. "Now you're a family." And Vaughn, cheeks smudged with dirt, shouted, "Forever." Later, after Vera fell asleep curled at the foot of the bed, and Vaughn snored softly on the cot beside the stove, Hattie sat with Silas on the porch, wrapped in a quilt. The moon rose over the ridge, full and slow. "You ever think about where you might have ended up if you hadn't sent that wire?" she asked. "I would have lasted," he said, "but I wouldn't have lived." She leaned against him. "I used to think love was a thing I couldn't hold. You're holding it now. She looked up. And I'm not letting go. Years later, folks in Green River would say the O'Doyle place never felt hard like the rest, something about the way the gates never stuck, or the smell of ink from the barn, or how the children who grew up there spoke plain and kind. Vera became a teacher, Vonna Smith. Hattie printed wedding notices and birth announcements, and one small book of stories penned by her daughter, bound in cloth and given to every child in the valley. Silas never left the land. He built an extra room when the grandchildren came, and kept a carved wooden fox on the windowsill in memory of a bedtime tale. And on every spring morning, Hattie still rose early, brewed coffee, and stood on the porch waiting for the sky to open with light. Silas joined her, always. He never brought up the past. She never needed to ask. They had already lived the hardest part. What came next was theirs to keep. Together, they grew old with no fear, no doubt, and no more running. Only love, deep and quiet, rooted as steady as the cottonwoods.